people anticipate me to begin with philosophy, possibly with a metaphor about water. Ancient wisdom handed down through generations, yet the reality I'm about to share began with failure or humbling, is important. Failure, let me tell you about a night that changed everything, not in a temple, nor beneath direction of a wise master, but in a small apartment in Hong Kong. 1957, I had just lost a fight, not a street brawl or a challenge. Match, but something more intimate, a simple sparring session with a learner. Technically, I won at half my ability level, but victory I felt a tremendous defeat. My tactics were perfect, my form superb. And that was precisely the problem. I had become a prisoner of perfection, executing moves without that night. While studying my own reflection in a dirty window, I witnessed something that hundreds of hours of traditional training had obscured from me: the human body's inability to move perfect angles. Conflict does not flow in fixed patterns. As we had learning to swim by exercising on dry ground the next morning, I approached my master with questions rather than with "we chamber our fists," with real curiosity, not out of rebellion or disdain. Exactly this angle. What happens if we depart by 2 degrees? Basic inquiries are dead. His response wasn't anger or disdain. It was fear, not of me, but of the ambiguity these issues conveyed, he observed. Perfection lies in precision. Nature, I discovered, sought beauty in adaptation, which began my genuine education. I began exploring in secret, not out of defiance. Every night, I would break down one conventional dance to its rawest form, components not to repudiate tradition, but to grasp it at the molecular level. What I discovered wasn't revolutionary because it was new, but because it was natural. The body already knew this. We had just learnt to ignore them, like learning to walk by memorizing. We overcomplicated something essential with our foot movements, and the masters later challenged me, didn't understand what I was seeking, and saw a young man trying to break. What I was actually trying to dispel was the idea that tradition and evolution must be. Unfortunately, some of what I'm going to reveal may appear to contradict what you've learned about. Combat other components may appear deceptively simple, but both replies, our appropriate truth, does not always appear in the box we expect. I've preserved these principles. I've kept them confidential, not because they're secret procedures or hidden powers. Each practitioner must make deep discoveries and personal realizations. Instead of simply learning today, I break this. Quiet not because the timing is right, time is neutral. I share these insights because I see something in the present generation of martial artists that I used to see dusty window, a readiness to challenge not only the answers, but the questions themselves. What follows isn't new. Style or system is a blueprint of my journey from imitation to understanding. The principle I'll discuss is a door. I discovered where these doors lead for you, which is let's begin with the first concept, which started with a basic what if we knew everything about power creation in martial arts. The dispute with Jackman is founded on a fundamental misunderstanding of human movement. Taught me something that no victory ever could. Many know about this war, but few realize its true significance. It wasn't the war itself that showed this idea, but what happening in my mind throughout the 3 minutes halfway through that interaction. Tired and frustrated, I experienced something significant, and my programmed responses, perfected techniques, they began to fall away, not because they failed, but because they were not fast enough for my mind's notion of time in that moment of crisis. My mind went into a state I had never experienced before, conventional separation. Between thinking and action faded. This wasn't the much praised flow state that athletes talk about. This was something far more fundamental. This experience led me to construct what I call consciousness. The notion of stability is counterintuitive. To obtain actual stability, you must first embrace not only is there physical instability, but also mental, emotional, and technological. In Seattle, I devised a special drill to stand on one leg simply. Now close your eyes and feel how your body produces thousands of micro. Most martial artists strive to minimize these modifications, but I want you to exaggerate them and let yourself wobbling, but keep alert of every movement. It has been programmed to seek stability, but under this controlled instability, something occurs. As your consciousness develops, you begin to experience not only your equilibrium, but also the process balancing this resulted in a deeper discovery, which I call brain pattern. Interruption. I first observed this when working with James Coburn. He was a good student, but struggled with firmly set habits in his right cross-conventional corrective approaches. Failed. Then by mistake, we discovered something instead of trying. To rectify his punch, I had him perform it underwater with complete resistance. When he returned to normal striking, his brain was compelled to change the feedback his neurological system received. Generate new brain pathways, the old pattern was disrupted, and this links closely to Chinese idea of Wai Shi consciousness, not consciousness as, according to ancient Chinese thinking, consciousness is more than merely consider the word awareness, which serves as a bridge between intention and actuality. Consciousness in English denotes passive awareness, whereas Yesu indicates something active, dynamic, is more than just being aware of your movement. It is about being attentive. Attentive! Conscious instability creates a state in which this deeper consciousness might develop when you stand on one leg. Wobbling your mind becomes aware not only of balance, but also of how it perceives. Balance not only of movement, but of how it causes movement, which is why conventional training approaches frequently fail, as they focus on attaining stability through true stability does not come from repeating the same thing precisely. The principles that govern all movement and the drill I designed in Seattle emerged from this understanding. Begin with bodily instability, then increase cognitive pressure. Recite a complex series of while keeping that unstable position. Your mind will want to split these jobs. Don't allow it, push it to. This isn't about multitasking. It's about breaking down the artificial boundary between physical and mental activity. In reality, there is no differentiation between mind. The body is a device that limits our ability to remember the sensation you, as a toddler, beginning to walk. I felt there was no difference between thinking and doing. Your complete being was involved in the activity. That integrated condition is what we are. Attempting to reclaim at a higher level of consciousness using these ways. We're not just training the body or focusing the mind. We're repairing the bridge between them that are designed. People frequently question me about power, and compartmentalized training has failed. They're asking the wrong question about how to generate it and regulate it. The true secret isn't power, but energy, not the supernatural energy that some martial arts schools teach. Something a lot more tangible. Important discoveries I made throughout a time of intense individual training. In 1967, I pushed myself to fatigue, as always. But this time, I observed something distinct in that stage of full depletion. Something about my breathing had shifted. Not simply its rhythm, but also its interaction with my traditional Chinese medicine refers to key pathways. But I discovered something more fundamental exists between the exhale and inhalation. Tiny pause, a moment of perfect stillness. Most breezes pass this, but in that silence lies the key to energy manipulation that transformed everything I understood about combat. Try this exhalation. Notice the little delay before your body wants air. In that fraction of a second, instead of battling this moment of vulnerability, lean into it. What you'll discover is paradoxical. Supreme weakness becomes a door to supreme power. I devised what I call micro-recovery. Most fighters believe that healing happens in between rounds or training sessions. But I learned you could shorten recuperation into milliseconds. It is not about breathing, faster or slower. It's about shifting your Danny no Santo, and I spent months cultivating our relationship with energy. Exploring this principle, we created an exercise that seems impossible at first. Retaining maximum power output while simultaneously recovering without cycling between the two states. However, experiencing them simultaneously resulted in even more. We made a major discovery concerning the basis of time perception, and noted that in these situations of concurrent exertion and recovery, our experience of time itself began to transform, not in some mystical sense, but in a very tangible and concrete. The TSTSTS described time as a river that might flow at different speeds. Contemporary science validates this through relativity. But what I observed was to implement this principle in fighting. It is not about moving faster. This practice is about experiencing time differently. Begin with a simple punch and throw it at 1/4 speed. Focus not on the movement, but on your experience of it now. Without modifying, the physical speed increases your awareness of each. Microsk, you'll notice something strange. The punch seems faster when moving. This is what I call perceptual recalibration. Your body moves at the same speed, but your consciousness extends to fill the gap between. Moments is not about slowing down time, but about broadening your perception of the breakthrough occurred when we realized that this wasn't merely a cerebral exercise for the neurological system. This state affects your ability to process information. Accelerates while your actual movement remains constant, creating a sort of temporal. Leverage greater consciousness in each moment of action. But consider how a high-speed camera can see details in a water droplet splash that the naked eye cannot. Realize your consciousness can achieve this same potential, not by speeding up moves, but by increasing your perception of each movement during training. With Dan, we discovered that this state was transferable when one individual entered it. Enlarged temporal awareness, they can really draw others into it. Two dancers discover the same rhythm, but instead of sharing a beat, they sharing a dimension of consciousness is a practical reality, not a metaphysical one. Human perception. Just like your eyes adjust to darkness, your consciousness may adjust. Understanding that time perception is not fixed, it's a variable that can be learned. Remember that energy is more than simply power production, and time is more than merely speed. When you grasp how to manage both, you discover that they're essentially the same thing, different. What I'm going to discuss began with one of my most humble manifestations of the same core notion. Failures, it was 1969, and I had reached what I thought was the height of my physical technical improvement. My speed was unrivaled. And my power in a private sparring session, a novice fighter caught me completely off guard with a strike that wasn't whether fast or technically sound. My consciousness was locked in a single dimension of consciousness. I was so concentrated on my own technical perfection that I became blind. Due to the unpredictability of real combat, I began to investigate what consciousness cycling takes. A simple movement, a basic straight punch, now throw it 5 times, each from an entirely different state. Consciousness first analytically aware of every technical detail, second instinctual pure reaction, third environment, total awareness of your surrounds, fourth energetic focused on internal sensations, fifth empty. With no attention, most martial artists are locked in one mode of consciousness. Traditional training reinforces this, encouraging us to keep a warrior mindset, a state of continual, however. Actual combat readiness is not about sustaining a single state. It is about acquiring the ability to transition between states. states. Western psychology talks about flow states, and heightened Eastern philosophy defines various planes of consciousness. I discovered that the truth lay in gaining the ability to navigate between various states, rather than deciding between them. Most practitioners fail while attempting to create new states of adding consciousness to their already existing one is like attempting to construct a second floor without eliminating the ceiling. You must first have the skill to collapse your current state before gaining access to another. This gets us to the concept of identity fluidity, which is strongly related to the Chinese concept of wu no. In Hong Kong, I designed a training method that appeared counterintuitive at first. Instead of building a fighter's identity, I would strive to dissolve it, starting with a fundamental position. Utterly forsake your notion of yourself as a martial artist and let go of every technique. You've learned every principle you know. What remains isn't weakness, but purity. This condition of woo-woo is not about becoming nothing, but rather about I once proved this in an actual combat situation. An aggressive challenger approached me, radiating hostility. Instead of confronting his energy with my own fighting identity, completely sank into a state of no self. The effect was immediate. Deep his aggression met emptiness, and in that space all of his preparation became ineffective. The training method I designed involves rapidly cycling through different personas throughout practice, not role-playing or pretending, but genuinely feeling the collapse and reformation of self. One moment you're a seasoned fighter, the next you're a complete rookie and formless. This isn't philosophical, it's potential followed by pure awareness. Theory is practical fight psychology when you can disintegrate. Reconstructing your identity at will makes it impossible to predict your opponent's preparedness. Becomes worthless because they're facing a fluid rather than a fixed thing. The breakthrough occurs when you recognize that your martial identifying all of your training and techniques is your greatest by learning. To release your biggest power and constraint, you can obtain access to something far away, more powerful, pure, and unfiltered human potential. Remember, consciousness isn't just knowledge of your surroundings or techniques. It's awareness of awareness. When you can modify not just what you're cognizant of, but how you're aware, you enter a dimension of combat that most fighters never even know exists. Most martial artists confuse theoretical effectiveness with truthfully. I learned this lesson with Taki Kimura in a way that I'll never forget. When we explored a new training, I invented a method that I was confident would change combat. Taki stood as always. They were patient as I conveyed my difficult idea regarding angular momentum and neuron. The idea was flawless on paper, the physics made sense, and the anatomy, everything pointed to this being a breakthrough in combat efficiency test, but Taki simply said no. In a controlled setting, not with a collaborative partner, but against pure unpredictable. What happened next broke my conceptual knowledge of martial techniques, failed entirely, not just half. In that moment, I realized that execution was a lack of understanding. The distinction between theoretical truth and functional truth prompted me to create what I call reality testing. Is not merely pressure testing methodologies, but pressure testing the basic principles themselves, every assumption, every theory. Every truth had to withstand touch with chaos, and the procedure was easy. Take any concept you believe in and suggest 3 scenarios in which that principle should fail, not might fail, should fail. Then test against those situations. If your principle survives, you have not built harsh enough. The hardest test I ever faced wasn't physical. It occurred when I needed to. Question my most basic assumptions about electricity generation. I had developed a whole framework of thinking around a particular fundamental of body mechanics, reputation, effectiveness, and identity as a martial artist. All artists relied on this foundation, and the test revealed more than merely defects in the principle, but Flaws in my understanding of truth. I found that truth in combat isn't a fixed position, but rather there is a feeling when resonance, like a tuning fork, finds its ideal frequency. Something is aligned with reality. This resonance cannot be faked, be theorized. It must be felt when a principle corresponds with the truth. There is a physical experience of rightness, not emotional gratification or intellectual agreement. Feeling in tune with reality, consider throwing a small. There is a point when everything aligns. Bodily, structure, time. Intent is the impression of perfect alignment. Resonance is not. Theory claims it's correct, but reality confirms. The scientific method provided a framework for hypothesis testing and observation. Conclusion. In combat, these stages occur in microseconds. Thus, you must develop what I call instantaneous empiricism, or the ability to construct tests and validating theories in the face of chaos. Is the most challenging component of reality testing is not the physical demand, but the emotional and intellectual humility required to fully subject your views to failure. Most practitioners automatically protect their notions by designing tests, designed to confirm rather than challenge. Remember that truth isn't what works in theory, or even what works most of the time. The truth remains unaffected when everything else comes apart, which is why the most useful tests are the ones who break our techniques, smash our theories, and force us to encounter truth without the comfort of our assumptions, as I've described. Intentional destabilization, energy manipulation, and dimensional training reality testing are all fragments of a broader truth, and the true breakthrough arrived when I stopped perceiving them as independent ideas and saw that they were different expressions of the same core notion occurred during in 1973, during a private training session. I worked with all of these. Concepts exist simultaneously without attempting to integrate them. Every idea collapsed into a single point of understanding, not by intellectual study, but through direct experience in that moment. I recognized that all these ways were truly about one item that liberates the human organism from its learned limits. The true problem was never physical capacity, but rather our inherent misinterpretation of human potential. Recent training approaches emphasize on optimization, better methods, faster responses, and stronger movements, but still working within the boundaries of what we think is feasible. True breakthrough comes from questioning the consider, a youngster learning to walk. They do not study biomechanics, they do not analyze optimal foot positioning, and their experiments fail. Adapt and discover their learning isn't restricted by notions about what's perhaps this is the stage we must return to, but with conscious understanding, your path will not look like mine. It can't. These ideas aren't meant to be copied, rediscovered via your own experience. The methods I've offered are not strategies to master, but portals to open each to your own exploration. Synthesis occurs naturally when you stop trying to synthesize and stop trying to perfect them. Then, principles, instead of allowing them to fail and contradict each other, let them produce confusion, in that failure, in that contradiction that is genuine. Remember, the ultimate breakthrough doesn't involve a new technique, or the premise is the recognition that any technique, the principle, is only a temporary instrument for revealing your own direct interaction with reality. Once you comprehend this, you'll stop wanting perfection and instead seek truth. Your journey begins where my explanations end. Take these principles not as answers, however, as questions. Let them steer you not to mastery, but to mystery, because ultimately, the real discovery isn't what you learn about martial arts. It is what you learn about human potential itself. This is where I leave you. With a finale, but with a beginning, the true test of these, the fundamental test of principles, is not whether you can grasp them or even apply them. It is whether they lead to remember, above all, the path of personal discovery. isn't about being better than others, but about becoming more fully. You are the ultimate representation of these ideas, not perfection, but genuineness, not mastery, but freedom with you. We've come full circle from that young man's inquiry, traditional forms in Hong Kong, to these underlying truths about humans' potential. But the adventure we've shared today isn't ending, it's just beginning. Look at your hand for a moment, make a fist, and then release it. It sounds simple, but every idea we've discussed is contained in one simple movement. The conscious instability when your fingers migrate from one form to another, energy manipulation in the tension, and release the dimensional awareness of each finger. What is an effective fist? That is the beauty of these ideas. Ideas exist in every movement. While waiting to be noticed, you don't require sophisticated training methods or to use secret strategies. Simply approach each situation with the curiosity of a scientist and the wonder of a child. The most deep truth I've discovered isn't about fighting at all, but rather the nature of discovery. Every time you believe you've reached the limit of understanding, you'll discover another layer. Waiting to be peeled away is not frustrating. Liberating these principles, deliberate destabilization, energy manipulation, dimensional training, and reality testing are not independent routes. They are distinct windows looking into the same room. Your objective is not to master them separately, but to determine where they cross with your own experience. Some of you will take these ideas and develop applications. I believed that others will discover principles I never saw, which is exactly what should happen. True comprehension is not about reproducing someone else's discoveries, but about making your own. Remember that the true measure of comprehension isn't how well you can explain these principles, but in how naturally you can articulate them. I want to part ways with you by intuitive integration rather than conscious application. Share one last thought. The greatest constraint to human potential isn't physical. It's our hesitation to challenge what we think we know. Every breakthrough begins with every discovery, begins with doubt. Embrace that. Allow doubt to guide you as we continue to explore and learn. Grow for true Kung Fu rests not in the perfection of technique, but in transcendence of self. The path is limitless, the journey is personal, and the finding is yours.